Dr. Gonsalves, you could not have set a better tone, right, Tess, for our conversation next. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you can stay with us. And by the way, one of our listeners, Tony, has sent a message to you saying that Cabo Verde has just beaten Uganda in the basketball. So that's a nice note to end on. Thank you so much.
That's right. You know, it boosts our ego. But
exactly.
when there's one winner, there's a loser this time around. But in sport, fair play is what really counts.
Exactly, exactly. So please, I hope you stay and listen to the panel debate. And yes. I feel, I don't know why, but I'm looking at my colleague Tess and I'm thinking, I feel another event coming on where we're going to invite you. I don't know why. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for honoring us.
Thank you for the opportunities to be shared some ideas with you.
And let's speak again soon. Thank you.
Okay. Much success.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to go straight into my my three professional colleagues for the panel, and because time is running short, and I'm going to quickly introduce everyone. And look, guys, to be honest, they have LinkedIn profiles. Their names are written in front of their faces. They are amazing people that will leave your jaw. So just go and read about them while I just do a little brief introduction. I am so happy to have these three people with me today, because I think that Mr. Gonsalves actually set a really good stage for what we are about to say. Okay, so Tess Pruz, which everyone knows. If you don't know Tess, you've been living under a rock. She has great passion for all things to do with hospitality. She's more passionate than anything about incentive travel, and she's the president of South Africa, Society of Incentive Travel Excellence. And but she's also lots of other things, because she was the first chair of the South Africa Events Council, which was formed in March 2020 as a result of the COVID lockdowns. She actually got me to do a few things with her. She's a slave driver, I have to tell you. This collaboration comprises about 14 associations who joined forces to lobby for the reopening of the event sector. And they have been so active, and we owe them so much to get the conversation on the agenda. We are forever grateful, Tess. But Tess has had a really diverse career as a hotelier, working for a destination management company. Then she formed her own company. She's an entrepreneur today, and she runs Crystal Events Africa. Also go on LinkedIn and find out about Crystal Events Africa. And then, of course, we have Sean Mendes. For me, he's in the top right-hand side of the screen with the gorgeous big smile. And Sean Mendes has 2 decades of experience in senior management roles across various airlines in Africa. He most recently was the immediate past Chief Operations Officer of Africa World Airlines. I hope that's right. He also worked for Ghana International Airlines in various areas of airport management, etc. And he's presently in Malawi, right? Where he offers executive level consultancy and intelligence to aviation stakeholders. Thank you for joining us, Sean.
Thank
you.
So
we're spread out across the world, okay? And then, of course, we have Eve Ngenzi, who for me is on the bottom of my screen. He's going to switch off his camera, I think. Switch on. Hello, Eve. Good morning or good afternoon, okay, or whatever. Eve is the regional coordinator of the East Africa Tourism Platform. It's a hospitality and tourism. He was a hospitality and tourism practitioner for over 13 years. I'm going to ask you about the platform in a minute. He's also worked for the Rwanda Development Board in executive positions, and he previously worked as a marketing executive for Rwanda Air. So we're going to have a quick conversation, not only about things that came up in the presentation by Mr. Gonsalves, but also because one of the most irritating things is the visa rollout. I get so annoyed on the visa issue. I am so annoyed on this. But anyway, we'll talk about the tourism sector recovery plan, and that's really important. But I'm going to ask each of them a different question to start out with. So I'm kind of going through, because I know we're running late, and I know that people have have their lives to live. Okay, so Tess, you are mostly focused on incentives, but incentives is one of the pillars of MICE. Okay, so we tend to talk to ourselves, as you know, within our industry, and we know how important we are, and we know what value we bring to the table. But I don't think it's ever enough that we share with people outside our industry as well what we actually bring to the table, because it's often forgotten, because we are a fundamental pillar of economic development. So Tess, what is MICE for you and its impact?
Sure. How much time do we have?
6 days.
All right. I think it's been mentioned in the previous discussions between the ambassador and Dr. Gonzalez. The economic impact of MICE is absolutely phenomenal. And I think as a case study, I'm just going to use one of my events that I did prior to COVID. It was a conference, an investor conference. It was hardly 200 people. 4 investors attended. They ended up investing $5 billion in the BPO industry in South Africa. That created 20,000 new jobs. I think that says it all. It was one event. Absolutely. So imagine all the other events, and you touched on it earlier, every sector, whether it's engineering, mining, we have the mining in Durban in Cape Town every year, which brings to the city approximately 5 people over a period of 5 days. The incremental spend is phenomenal. The supply chain, the economic supply chain within events, within the MICE industry is massive. And it's been growing across Africa. So it's been absolutely heartwarming to watch the likes of East Africa, Rwanda, Uganda coming up now. Those guys are already under the top 10 on the ICA rankings, which is fantastic. Ghana stepping up to the plate.
Amazingly well lately.
I know, they're the golden boy of Africa at the moment.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but that's it in a nutshell. And, you know, if I can just touch on incentives, it's probably the lesser spotted creature in MICE. You know, probably the least understood, but yes, the yield from your average incentive traveler is 4 to 5 times higher than your average conference traveler. And I'll talk about that in our dedicated incentive travel session a bit later, and I'll show some figures. But bottom line, economic impact in MICE is absolutely huge.
It's phenomenal. I have to add just a little thing to what you said. For example, after this event, I'm going to quickly go to moderate and lead an event on the wine industry. And it brings together producers. Yeah, the wine is additional. Yes, it's there as well. It brings together producers, governments. It brings together the distribution channels. And you only have 150 people in the room, but they run 85% of the world's wine industry. And remember the impact that COVID has had. These events are necessary because then they will solidify new relationships, provoke new productions, create mergers, educate governments to reinvest and to strategize. Yes, Tess, you're right. It's phenomenal what we do through the work that we do. But while work is very difficult to do, if we can't get anywhere, and although Dr. Gonzalez said, and it is true, that technology has come to help us through these 2 years, what we have found through research is that all companies want to go back to live. And they want to go back to live because they say that for every $1 they invest in a live meeting, they get $17 return on investment. And it does not happen online. They do not want to sponsor or hold online events. But in order for us to go back, we need to create that trust that Dr. Gonzalez was talking about, and we need airlift, and we need to go back to some kind of, at the moment, everybody's crazy. So Sean, what's going on? What Dr. Gonzalez talked about SATAM, he talked about recovering and bringing airlift. What's going on? Are we really in Africa so mistrusting of our neighbors? Are we really just giving up? Are we still paralyzed? What's going on, Sean?
Thanks, Linda. That's
Sorry,
a good
I
question.
put you on the spot.
No. This is a question that I could go on for 6 days about, but I'll try and condense it a bit. I think there are two sets of questions here. One is pre-pandemic, and in general, why is African air connectivity not up to the standard of other parts of the world? Even in developing countries, African air connectivity has been especially bad between neighboring countries and between regional areas. And the second part is, what has the COVID pandemic done to effects? And I'll answer the second part first, because it's actually pretty interesting, is that the recovery in Africa is actually tending to be stronger than it has been in other parts of the world. Relatively, it's all relative. There's still a very slow recovery. In fact, you're seeing some African countries which have taken a tact of looking more domestically and regionally to boost their travel due to closed borders, due to difficulties in accessing further away destinations. And Ghana is an example of this. If you're looking at the statistics in comparing 2021 to 2019, there are two countries in the world which look like they will exceed their 2019 traffic totals domestically in 2021. One is China, which had a depressed traffic in 2019 anyway when COVID-19 first hit over there. And the second one is Ghana, which is on track to having approximately 20% growth in 2021 versus 2019. And I think that just shows that, a focus on maybe domestic tourism, inward-looking business and so forth, but the ability then to be able to focus on yourselves, your neighbors and everything else is something that may be a silver lining that comes out of the pandemic. Now, going back to the first part of the question, which is why has Africa struggled in general? And I think, it may not be a popular view here with all the various government stakeholders, but I think the key reason for this is governments themselves. Governments in Africa have often viewed aviation as a soft touch, as a luxury product which can be easily tapped for additional taxation and so forth. If you are looking to fly between Accra and Lagos, for example, it is a 40-minute flight. It's served many times a day. And the airfares, just the airfare, which is what the airline sets and what the airline gets out of it, is about maybe $100 each way. But on top of that, you are going to pay $150 in taxes on a round trip. And those taxes go off to the governments, to the airport agencies, to the meteorological agencies, and basically everybody. The infrastructure requirements are being fed through ongoing user fees, often being used to pay debt service to external entities and so forth. The lack of access to capital for the private sector makes them overly reliant on governments. And when governments themselves are not entirely committed to developing the infrastructure, means that costs go up. And when costs go up, obviously volumes go down. And I think that is probably the key reason why Africa has stagnated in its aviation development. Certainly, there are pockets of Africa where this is not true. Ethiopian Airlines, is growing very strongly. But when you look at government involvement, and especially COVID has highlighted which of these home truths are coming home to roost. South African Airways, I think everyone knows the story there of how effectively COVID forced it into final failure. Kenya Airways requires renationalization. Rwanda is getting huge bailouts. Air Senegal is getting huge bailouts. The government-run airlines have been exposed as not being nimble enough, and governments in general have been exposed that their investments have been more focused on running airlines rather than developing infrastructure and developing a conducive business environment for the private sector to come in, be more agile and be more innovative. And I think that is something that can really help boost African connectivity once the right policy frameworks are put in place.
So we're back to policy again. We're back to policymakers again. The onus falls on them. Do you think that the last 2 years we've seen any move forwards towards rethinking that?
I think we're still too early to judge that. I think, during the pandemic, governments
around the world. Or have we wasted 2 years? I mean,
no, I don't think it's been a waste at all. I think that a lot of governments around the world are going to see their finances stressed by the pandemic. And as a result, when they come out the other end of it, when they're having to stop spending on, vaccinations and healthcare and things as much as they are right now, they might realize that, connectivity and aviation in particular has been something that kept them alive during this time. If it wasn't for aviation, you wouldn't have vaccines being delivered to many of these countries. Landlocked countries would not have been able to trade with land borders closed and so forth. And I think that may actually occur to them that, you know what, maybe a bit more investment in aviation infrastructure and a bit more liberalization to allow the private sector to do something, because we can't afford to do it. African countries cannot continue throwing money at loss-making national airlines with basket cases for business cases. And I think, you know, I'm optimistic. I think that the countries which reach that realization, which start thinking that aviation can be a tool to generally boost the economy, to bring in tourists, to bring in business travelers, to generally, you know, help in developing your country, those countries will be the ones that that benefit from this pandemic in the long run.
From your mouth to their ears. Okay, let's keep hoping. I always try to see a positive. I will have my doubts, but I try to see a positive. And I do hope, I am very hopeful that these 2 years have been learning years, that it has not been just stagnation, that we have learned, because it has given us time to refocus our energies and where we want to go and where we want to lead move forward. And Eve, thank you for joining us. Eve, I love your background and your mountain in the background, lovely. So Eve, what is your area, your field? What are they doing to bring us back to rejuvenating demand, to marketing, to positioning, to strengthening, to enabling? What's happening in the tourism sector in Africa?
Thank you, Tess. Thank you for having me. And again,
Your microphone is very low, my dear.
Sorry, I think I'll have to hold it somewhere here. Thank you for having me and for inviting us. Indeed, as you were saying, I agree with what had been said before with all the participants. In line with what we went through throughout this pandemic, it was not different from what we experienced in East Africa, where we had, I think, some of the toughest measures and restrictions. Indeed, we've seen from our side where we have been seeing a lot of, we've seen reduced staff, we've seen staff losing jobs, we've seen some of the mines facilities shutting down, as well as a lot of anxieties from the investors themselves, where they have been having issues with some of them who had loans to be able to repay these loans, and as well as accrued interest since they were not making businesses. So these are some of the issues that we've seen across the different countries in East Africa, but I think this is globally. It's not something that is only for this part of the region. So what has been happening, I think there's a lot of emphasis that has been, and the government have been trying to put on some recovery mechanisms, some recovery strategies and fund to be able to help the tourism industry. For example, in Rwanda, 50% of the whole recovery fund was assigned to the tourism sector. Same as for other countries in the region where we've seen that they've put tourism as a priority sector. In line with that, I would say at the regional level, what we've seen areas where we are trying to harmonize the different strategies, putting together a regional recovery strategy for tourism, putting together a harmonized way of protocols of travel. For example, recently we've had an ESC pass, an ESC travel pass, which is a system, an app basically, which will facilitate the different travelers to be able to travel in the region, basically recognizing the testing and the vaccination systems. So I would say that there have been some efforts on the side of both private sector and public sector. We've seen a lot of interventions, some of them being putting in some incentives in terms of park permits or any other in that regard, to be able to allow again incentive travel. But at this stage, what I will say is that we need to, all of us, reignite again the passion for travel before we say where our business is going. Is it going to East Africa or West Africa? But we need collectively to reignite this passion before we see progress and everything picking up.
I have to bring into the conversation, and to all three of you, but Eve, especially, as we are still continuing our chat. One of the things that I have heard in many forums, and I myself have brought it up, is the fact that if we're looking at a new way of meeting and a new way of holding live events and a new way of going back, then Africa provides the perfect meeting room. Okay, the open air spaces, the specific. For example, I organized an event in Portugal outdoors in August, and it rained. It never rains in August, but it rained. You know, the probability in Africa would be less. You have the outdoor spaces. You have great places for us to reinvent the way that we meet. Is it just about igniting the passion, Eve, or is it about getting the word out there that Africa is looking to roll out e-visas, or is looking to connect to its neighbors, etc.? If people have the possibility to go to one country and then pop over and visit another, it's a completely different attraction proposal than people who live next door to each other and don't talk to each other. Is that not the negative message? Should we be giving a new message, Eve?
Yes, you're right, very right, Linda. Indeed, when you look at what has been the lessons that we've learned during this pandemic, is about one is of course about digital innovations and having to adapt. So we've seen that those that are quickly adapting and are recovering faster and progressing. So that is one of the lessons that we've seen. We've seen that innovations in all areas of guest services is required in the customer engagement, and as well as even diversifying. We've seen some MICE companies diversifying to go in the whole travel experience. But as well as we connect even in other countries, we still have some cross-border issues in terms of cross-border travel. There are still some issues, especially regarding the regulations that are in place and the restrictions to be able to allow, for example, if one is to travel to I would say from Uganda to Kenya, you may have to attend an event, may have to have 4 PCR tests back and forth. So that is already $200 minimum, or $300 only for testing, without putting in place if there is a quarantine required. So all these are some of the challenges that we still see across. But as well as we see the vaccinations are still very low. And this is one of the key factors to see recovery and renew in business, especially for MICE. So the vaccination rates are still quite low in Africa in general. Even here in East Africa, we still see less than 10% across the continent and the region. So, and as well, we've had issues in this quarter where we had started seeing some rebound in the MICE business, but we've seen again some area where we had the Delta variant. And again, we went into lockdowns. We had lockdown in Kigali, in Uganda, a lot of restrictions as well in Nairobi. So all of that has deeply affected, again, the MICE sector. But we are hopeful that as restrictions are getting lifted and the sizes of people allowed in meetings slowly opening up, we will see more business coming up.
I have to tell all of you that one of the best adverts I've heard for opening up in Africa and for tracking is one of my clients who went with his family to Kenya, and the whole family caught COVID. And he came back and I phoned him and I said, oh, I'm so sorry that the kids and the wife, and he goes, It was worth it. It was the best trip of my life. It was worth it. And it was just so amazing. So it's about us inspiring the visitors again. But Tess, back to you. Can I just say that it is harder to talk to an African Minister of Tourism than for me to talk to the King of Spain? Okay. Are they actually listening to the people, to the practitioners? Are they listening to the people who have the hands-on experience, who are in the market? Are they listening to Sean's and to Eve's and to Tess's? Are they listening? We've all talked about the 3 phases of COVID, you know, panic, paralysis, and then pivoting, okay? The 3 Ps. Are they actually listening to the people who are on the ground every day and can help them steer, not through the long trek, but jump right to the end of the trek?
Linda, let's rock the boat here.
Oh, so, I'm with you. I'm with you.
So I'm going to talk a little bit wearing my SA Events Council hat. You mentioned the 14 associations that came together, and we've been lobbying government to help understand what is happening in our lives and to, you know, help reopen our industry as soon as possible. Now, one thing we've realized is it takes time. It takes time to get to the ear of a particular minister. And it's not just a minister of tourism. That's the important thing that our audience has to understand. We've got Ministry of Health, we've got Ministry of Transport, we've got Home Affairs with regard to visas and border closures, or border openings for that matter. There are so many spokes in this cog that we have to consider. We've had massive engagement with the Ministry of Sports, Arts and Culture. It was talking about events. Our concerts aren't happening, our sporting events aren't happening, our festivals aren't happening. What I can say is that it's taken a long time, and the people who sit on that events council has worked their collective guts out. But they are getting a reaction. Unfortunately, because of bureaucracy, it takes time. It absolutely takes time, but they now got to a point where they had meetings with in our country, they call it the NAT joints, did a fantastic proposal, and they are paying attention. But now here's our challenge with ministers. They changed like that. A couple of weeks ago, we had a complete parliament reshuffle. Then we practically have to start all over again. Now,
so once we've educated one, he leaves, and we have to start educating.
Exactly. But now my question is also, you know, my soapbox topic is, why are the policymakers across borders not holding hands and finding a solution? And I was so happy to hear Eve saying that they've started working on harmonizing policies, COVID policies and protocols across borders. In fact, we had this meeting in our Pan-African group a year ago, and it's music to my ears. For instance, the Kaza region, which is Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, 4 borders right there, but each one has got different protocols, making it almost impossible for people to plan a trip where you can actually visit 4 countries within 45 minutes. Why is it so hard? And that's something I really would like to encourage. And then I absolutely loved when the ambassador mentioned this in the beginning, is let us table this. And I hope that we can collaborate with Kezi and Molemwa, with our Pan-African group, and come up with solutions that the African Union can actually pay attention to. So why do we have an African Union, but none of them sat around a table to try and figure out this problem? Or did I miss something? Yeah. So I'm going to stop there. I know we're running out of time.
Oh, I know what you mean.
But
I know what you mean.
One other thing I'd like to, and maybe Dr. Gonzalez can ask this or answer this question. John Howell raised the question, who in the AU is actually sorting out the visa issue? Why do we have such a visa issue in Africa? Why is it not being addressed? Who's responsible for it?
Dr. Gonzalez, are you still online? Do you want to come on and answer that question? I don't know if he's hearing us.
Yes, yes, I'm still here following up on the very engaging discussions, and I'm glad to know that the fire has caught in the savannah. It's going fast. So I think, as Tess mentioned, and others as well, there are bottlenecks, major bottlenecks, constraints, and I think one thing so telling, as Tess mentioned, is the continual shakeover and replacement of ministers. It creates instability at the level of policy. Not all ministers have a particular, I think, how shall I say, preference to engage in certain policy directions. But I think the issue is that the border control issue is one that has deep-seated, I think, ideology behind it. We still, in Africa, countries are coming out of very protective, nationalistic border control. And that is psychologically embedded. And we are not very prone, our cultures, we are very gregarious people, very sociable. But at the state level, we create walls between countries. And countries sharing borders. You have to go through, I had experience going between Mozambique and South Africa. I had to go 2 border controls to go to Kruger Park, both going and coming. Just and the Kruger Park, the animals don't see, they don't have to go through the border control, but humans have to go to border control. So the issue, it's not just, I think that it's a question of awareness, I think government-wide, although there are certain ministers who have key point responsibilities, such as Minister for Border Control. But it's usually a collegial, council of ministers decide on unanimous decisions. But the question is, does a particular minister has the clout to push a certain policy? It's something, as I mentioned in my address, that we all need to put our finger on the pressure points. Whenever we get a chance to, to socialize with the minister or someone in policymaking level at any gatherings or any sort of events, we need to remind them that they're being watched and that we hold them accountable for expediting, for loosening the reins, so that business can flourish. So that, because that's what really they need at the end of the day. It is the revenues, the fiscal revenues that comes through business activities that help government really survive, and other than, of course, running debt, which is they're very good at doing. It's much easier to go get the loan in a foreign international financial institution than to collect taxpayers. But I think the point is that we each need to do our part to put pressure and to not lose sight that until the decisions are made and that we have the required access and mobility, our job is not finished yet.
Thank you. Stay with us if you don't mind,
Yeah,
but
yes.
Just a few more minutes, because I'm going to wind down, and I'm going to ask each one of my lovely guests to say that if they could do one thing, if they could recommend one change to policymakers, an immediate change that would make a difference, what would it be? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I think that we all, from our different sectors, which together, we all together, from aviation to tourism policy, to all together, we are the only ones that can reignite demand. We're the only ones that together can rejuvenate supply, and together we can strengthen and enable capability. And thank you, Dr. Gonçalves, because it is absolutely about putting pressure and using our voices. So Tess, I'll start with you. I'll go around and start with you. What one thing would you want changed immediately?
Linda, I would like to see common sense prevail. Why, why do we have shopping centers wide open with very little control? It's probably safer to go into a conference with proper COVID protocols or an exhibition, which effectively is a market. But we're not allowed to operate for more than 50 people at the moment. Yet markets and shopping centers can go gaga. Where's the logic? Casinos can operate at 50% capacity. Where's the logic? We need to open our industry because we live, breathe, and eat and sleep health and safety protocols. COVID just added another layer that we had to get accustomed to. Yes. So restaurants can operate with their protocols in place. Why can we not get back to meetings? So my one thing is reopen, or at least increase the capacity to make it economically viable to open a venue to host a conference or an exhibition.
With proper protocols that everybody shares and are implemented by everyone. Yes, thank you, Tess, perfect. And Sean.
Well, I think African governments in particular have been disproportionately involved in their economies in general, not just in aviation or in tourism. And that means governments are always important stakeholders, even when private sector entities are concerned. I think it's important for governments to realize that their real role is to create an enabling environment for its constituents to innovate and thrive, and not to stifle them with overregulation and unsustainably subsidized competitors. If a government starts thinking about what can I do to improve the economy, to improve this sector in particular, then the government should take its hands off as much as possible and focus itself on primarily regulating and ensuring that things are safe to reopen and safe to develop.
I am totally in agreement with you, Sean. Thank you. And Eve, what things I know a few things I would implement straight away. Eve.
Right, I agree with Tess and Sean. It's all about enabling environment for the business, especially tourism sector. Right now, I would request to have more vaccination for the tourism sector to ensure that we are safe and we are opening safely. And as well to have more incentives, especially for businesses that have suffered so much in terms of being able to repay their loans and their accrued interest. So incentives are very much needed, and as well as reducing the non-tariff barriers that are there. We spoke about the PCR tests that are required for staff, the quarantines that are required for travelers. Some of them really are not make sense at this time. So I think those are some of the issues that I will push on.
Yes, protect business and business will protect the country. Absolutely. And Dr. Gonçalves, would you like to leave a last message as well?
Yes, to say that I am very pleased to see people very engaged, people like yourselves, who are really at the forefront of driving this sector and the industry, to bring attention to all the limitations which exist, but also to the opportunities, I think, which are there. To do good things and important things has never been easy. And it will not be easy for us in Africa, unfortunately, especially when I think, you know, and I'm sure those, my former colleagues, ministerial level and so forth will forgive me for saying this, but I think we need a much more openness and clearer focus, and really to look at the essential and how to facilitate things. I think Sean put it very well in that the government should really stay at its role of favorable policy making, because you can also make wrong policies. Favorable policy making, and always keeping a clear eye on the fact that we need to facilitate the economy operating better at all levels. And I think often bureaucratic myopia seems to prevail when it comes to policy making, and losing sight of the essential, which is policy making should be to facilitate and it's a lubrication of the machine to permit the private sector to really thrive. governments are really there to provide a service and to facilitate, and not to how shall I say, dispute the territory and gamesmanship with really the economic actors. Often in Africa, sorry to say, we find the governments, in order to play to the grandstand to the public, often take steps in the economic sectors, which really is outside their purview. Let the private sector really take the leadership in the economy. The government should take a role of facilitating, of providing incentives, of guiding, and certainly in areas which need to be developed, but not to vie with the leadership of I think what the private sector should do. So people in government need to recognize their limitations in the world that we live. And for that reason, that I think, again, I hope that policymakers are listening to me. I was sitting there for 4 years, trying the best I could. I was fortunate enough to have 2 key sectors, I think, that we talked about here, amongst others, but the tourism and the travel and transportation sectors. But most cases, what you'll find are silos in governments throughout Africa. Seldom, we had that meeting in 2019 of the 2 sectors, air transport and tourism. I was one of the very few, I think it was just Cabo Verde and Seychelles were the only 2 countries in Africa which actually had one minister for the 2 sectors. And the 2 sectors go so much hand in hand. And more of this, and there was a minimum of silo, notwithstanding the fact that each ministry somehow, bureaucracy is bureaucracy, was trying to really, create its own cocoon. But if you have one minister or overseeing sectors which are complementary, it's actually easier to facilitate things. So again, continue the good work, everyone, and don't release the pressure, because it's the only way, no pain, no gain. So that's the task for all of us.
Thank you, Dr. Gonçalves. Thank you very much. And thank you to all my guests for your insight. I have about 20,000 questions, but maybe we'll leave them for another day. Thank you, Sean, for stepping in. Thank you, Eve. You're so interesting. I have to talk to you more. And thank you, Tess, for being present. Of course, thank you, Dr. Gonçalves, for me doing this horrible thing to you and making you come on again. Thank you all. And I am so honored to have had your presence. Thank you. Over to you, Mulemwa.
As I hand over to Kezi, I am going to remind you that 10 years ago today, we had the World Cup on our soil. The World Cup brought us infrastructure. The World Cup brought us a CV that said Africa could lead this. It's 10 years later, and we're still watching the English Premier League. We have not optimized the infrastructure that was built, because the rest of Africa felt that this was South African property. We could have had people building sporting events, football events, and building leagues over the last 10 years, but that didn't happen. So my challenge to you is that as long as we sit still and wait, the world around us is going to pass us by. But we need to now take up the challenge. The ambassador said the AU is ready to work with us. And now I will ask Kezi to sign us off from the roundtable and usher us into the next program.